Some of President Trump's recent outrageous political decisions, as well as his rhetoric, have got me thinking, what actually are the odds of a second American Civil War happening during his presidency? Now, I know that seems far-fetched. You might think, well, we had a first term of Trump. It was a full 4 years. He acted outrageous, and there was still no Civil War. So surely history will repeat itself, and there will be no Civil War during his second term. Now, of course, you have to keep in mind, though, that Trump's first term was quite a bit more mild than his second term already. Just comparing them. His second term has already taken his first term and put it on steroids, gone totally extreme, totally off the wall, total violation of the Constitution. And you know what President Trump said recently? He said that he doesn't know if he is supposed to uphold the Constitution. He said that in an interview around his first 100 days. And I'm going to venture a guess here that if someone asked Trump that during his first term, he would say something along the lines of this. Of course I will stand up for the Constitution. Standing up for the Constitution is a very, very good thing. It's a very important thing, and the left is coming after the Constitution, and they're after me because I'm standing up for the Constitution. They're not after me, they're after the Constitution. It's very important to stand up for the Constitution. The First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Third Amendment are very important. He would say that. But now, I don't know. He doesn't know. He doesn't know whether he has to stand up for the Constitution, even though it was in his oath of office that he took when he was sworn in. So what is going on here? Something different from his first term, it's fair to say. Unlike in his first term, where he did violate the Constitution, he's violating the Constitution a lot more, pretty much on a daily basis this time. I mean, these arrests, he's talking about arresting Governor Tony Evers of Wisconsin. Tom Homan said it. He's doing these military parades, a military parade, in fact, on his birthday. This just total fascistic nonsense, totally punitive nonsense too. I think a lot about that word, punitive. So what does that mean? That's basically like, hey, we're gonna rub salt in the wound, the wound being that the Democrats lost. And I just can't stop thinking about how if a Democrat had done what Trump is doing, had said what Trump is saying, then the media would go crazy over it. Everyone would be talking about it. It would tarnish their entire presidency. But with Trump, he puts out such an extensive volume of insanity that it's like, it's just another thing, and he gets to get away with it. Trump privilege, you could say. But Democrats, yeah, if Obama did something like what he did, say, oh, I don't know whether I have to defend the Constitution or not. It would be quoted like forever. People would still be hearing about it. If he said it back in 2009, just after taking office. Conservative media would still be talking about it, saying that's the anti-Constitution party, the Democrat party. They say Democrat, not Democratic, because Democrat ends with rat. It's a good rhetorical tactic. But they would say the Democrat Party hates the Constitution. This is proof of it. Obama said he doesn't know if he has to stand up for the Constitution. And yet Trump gets to go out there and say, I don't know. And people will still applaud him. So-called constitutional conservatives like Ted Cruz of Texas, the senator who says, oh, I support the Constitution. I'm a constitutional conservative. He'll support Trump even after that. These people are just taunting us. They're being punitive. They're saying, you fools thought that we cared about norms. You fools thought that we cared about constitutional guardrails. We're actually the ones who get to do whatever we want. You suckers are bound by the constitutional guardrails, you losers. That's what they're doing. They're laughing in our face. That is really what it seems like. There were people who said that Biden's presidency seemed punitive. I'm like, how on earth is that punitive? He made some mistakes, but for crying out loud, he played by the rules. Too much. I mean, think about the parliamentarian thing. But with Trump, it's just like, oh yeah, you guys played by the rules this whole time, but yet now I get to come in and just break the rules. It's kind of like Mitch McConnell as president when you think about it. Mitch McConnell was like, oh, okay, we can't get a new justice on the Supreme Court during an election year. But then he lets that happen under Trump. 2016 versus 2020. 2016, he's like, oh yeah, no, we can't replace Antonin Scalia till the new president takes office. But then in 2020, he's like, yeah, Trump, cram down Amy Coney Barrett onto the Supreme Court after RBG dies. Total insanity. So Trump is just Machiavellian. He and his administration are just like, yeah, no, you fools thought that we cared about the Constitution. We don't. We tricked you. Well, good thing there are people like me to call them out. But really, what type of reaction are we supposed to expect from this? An explosive one, or at least there should be. Hopefully not too explosive of one. And that's why I'm saying, well, what are the odds of a civil war here? What are the odds of people really kind of just saying, you know what, I don't want to just sit by. I want bloodshed. There might be people saying that. And it's insane to think because we have so many distractions these days. A lot of commentators have noted this. You can go on your phone and play games, Candy Crush or whatever, Mario Kart Tour, all that good stuff. But political ideologies are really strong drivers of people. When people get invested in that stuff, they can do insane things, in certain political causes. And I'm not saying that what they do is right. I'm just saying, yeah, they get invested in it. And people on the left even sometimes take things too far where they get super angry about a cause and commit violence. For example, there was that guy who shot up the congressional baseball game in 2017 with the Republicans. He shot Steve Scalise, and he was a Bernie Sanders supporter who was upset about the Republican healthcare plan. And the Republican healthcare plan was absolute garbage, make no doubt about it. But you don't get to go and shoot congressmen over that. So, yeah, Republicans, be careful. You are lighting a fuse. You are lighting a fuse. President Trump is lighting a fuse. I mean, look at the tax plan, look at the tariffs, all this stuff that is just squeezing the average American, just constricting life for the average American. And you know what? They're not even being subtle about it. Again, let me go back to the punitive nature that I see in the Trump administration's actions. Trump recently said, yeah, children, they can own $2 instead of 30. $2 instead of 30. Buddy, put down the Communist Manifesto or whatever. This is like that's what someone would say if a Democrat said that. But he's out here talking about how, prices are going to go up. Screw you. I'm going to do what I want to do. It's my thing. If a Democrat said this, they would be branded a communist for the rest of history. But no, Trump gets to say it. He's like, let me just flex my muscle. Let me just flex the fact that the Republicans will acquiesce to me no matter what. They'll think I'm cool. They'll never accuse me of being a communist for saying, oh yeah, you can have $2 instead of 30. It's a true let them eat cake moment, But what are we gonna do? What are people gonna do? How are people gonna react when they are taunted to their faces that, oh yeah, no, I'm in power now. I'm gonna make life worse for you. I'm a multi-billionaire. I live in the White House. I've had golden toilets or whatever. I have Melania Trump. I have Barron Trump, my gigantic son who's spoiled, all my spoiled brat children. I'm living the good life. You, however, you need to get $2 rather than 30. Sorry, loser. That's what he's telling you. So how do people react? I guess that's just my point. How are people going to react? The constitutional violations, again, are another thing where it's like, of course they're coming for people who seem more vulnerable first. That's by design. Think of the first they came for, the whole first they came for thing. Who are they going to start with? People easier, people who are less objectionable to go after, but then they'll start coming after people who are American citizens on the left, who were born here and who have done nothing except express disagreement with him. That's something that could very well happen. He's talking about arresting people, Tom Homan, arresting Democratic governors because they're supposedly helping illegal immigrants, but that's not actually what they're doing. What they're doing is just informing them of their rights. A judge was just arrested for trying to help illegal immigrants get due process. Just, hey, be careful. Look, don't go too far with these mass deportations, Mr. President. And I wanna let these people know that they do have the ability to, they do have certain rights that come with their being in the country, even if it's illegally. And they're like, no, we're gonna have you arrested for that, actually. It's obviously just a pretext for, oh, you oppose Trump, so we're gonna arrest you. But how thin are they willing to make that pretext, if at all? Will they just start being like, anyone who says something in favor of immigrants generally online, they are aiding illegal immigrants, and so we're going to arrest them? That is a legitimate concern. And so when progressives start getting their fears roused up, which I don't have mine totally yet, I'm concerned about a lot of what's going on, but I don't think that, I am going to be targeted or something like that, or any of my friends, or my governor even, my blue state governor. Not yet. But when they start playing with fire too hard, when they start getting too edgy, what's going to happen? Things might get explosive. And then the Republican base will get riled up. They'll say, oh, these people are traitors. They love illegal immigrants more than Americans. Nothing gets some of these people more angry than the idea that illegal immigrants are being treated better than Americans. And so if the Republican Party, Trump, and the pro-Trump networks can spin this grand narrative that, the Democrats, they're standing up for illegals and they hate Americans, they're traitors, they're committing treason, maybe Trump would even accuse these people of treason. Maybe the Trump administration would start prosecuting people for that. And there could be serious penalties for that. So, we have more than 3 years left of this presidency, and I am not saying much is off the table. I do not see many things as being off the table. Probably a lot of things are still off the table for the year 2025, but we still got 2026, 2027, 2028. And lastly, we have to talk about 2028 too, because 2028, is it going to be a fair election? Trump's in power now. He cannot run for a third term. He just can't, but he wants to. He said as much. He said he's serious about running for a third term. JD Vance obviously probably wants to be president too. And I also talked about how, he's blocking off a bunch of other Republicans from running. Think about it. After 2028, it comes 2032. If Trump were the nominee in 2028 for some goddamn crazy reason, it would have been 20 years since we had a non-Trump Republican as the nominee. And he's not going to be, but just something interesting to think about. 20 years, Mitt Romney in 2012. It would have been such a long time. So it's 2032, and finally we get a break from Trump. But that's not going to happen. So will the Republicans actually have a civil war within themselves? That's totally possible. That they're like, okay, no, Trump, you seriously cannot get a third term. We need a chill Republican in here, someone who's more popular with the establishment, someone who acts a little more pleasant, a little more buckled down, doesn't make weird posts, doesn't have typos in all their Truth Social posts, someone who's a little more gentlemanly and a little less orange. They might do that. And then also the context, within the context of left versus right, not just Republican versus Republican. What if they rig the election? They might straight up do that. They might straight up act so punitive as to rig the election in front of our faces and be like, well, look, Trump stood up for what's right. He saved his country. So he's actually just entitled to another term. You just have to lose to him, even though you wouldn't actually lose because a majority of people would vote for you. They would just rig it against the Democratic candidate in 2028. I do not entirely see that as being off the table. They could be more sly as well. They could be. They could say, well, no, look, it was a fair election. You just lost fair and square. That's what Trump says about 2024. He says, oh, it was fair. It's fair when I won, which oddly enough, Trump was in power in 2020 when he lost. Then he wasn't in power in 2024 and he won. So something doesn't add up there. But now he's in power and he might run in 2028. He might seriously consider it. Or some other Republican, JD Vance might run and he'll be like, oh yeah, I'm going to fix the election for JD Vance. He might just say, oh, I was kidding about that whole third term stuff. Don't put anything past him. He does bluff a good bit. Think about him saying he's going to lock Hillary Clinton up. That has not happened. So, he doesn't always make good on his promises, even his most dastardly ones. So, say we get Vance. And Vance, obviously, he's a very smart guy. I don't think that after 4 years of Trump, though, the country would want more of a Trumpian guy. I think that by 2028, people will be sick of it, even if the economy does not necessarily tank or is not necessarily in a depressed or recessed state by then. No depression, no recession, stock market doing just fine. I think people might still be sick of it, I think it's entirely possible. And I think a Democrat could come along and say, well, look, sure, the stock market's okay. Unemployment might not be bad. There's no depression, there's no recession. But has life actually gotten much better for you? There wasn't a depression nor a recession under Joe Biden when Trump got elected. Prices are still kind of high, not super high, but high. And so you should elect me. Trump didn't make good on his promise. They will attack Trump not so much for doing bad, but for not doing good enough. So a Democrat could come in and occupy that lane and make a really convincing case and then just lose because Trump steals the election. We know that voter suppression occurred in 2024. We know that in the state of Wisconsin, in fact, in Madison and Milwaukee, areas which are predominantly minority and young. But they just had massive voter suppression. 3 million votes that could have gone toward Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris could very well have won the election if not for voter suppression. And so in 2024 or 2028, what are the odds of that happening again? What are the odds of something similar to that happening except way worse? Way worse, They suppress even more votes. The Democratic candidate was supposed to win by even more, but yet, oh, sorry, we just threw your votes out. That could happen. And they say 2020 was rigged. And then what if the Trumpian candidate loses in 2028? Assuming there's a Trumpian candidate, which there probably will be, there's got to be someone to carry on that mantle. Someone to pass the torch to. What happens then? Do Republicans start a civil war? We were all concerned about what they would do after 2024. Think about that. If Kamala Harris won, I thought there was a good chance Kamala Harris would win, and she didn't win. But I talked about what happens if she actually loses. What is Trump going to do again? Is he going to come out there and declare victory again? So in 2028, is he going to come out there and declare victory on behalf of Vance if Vance loses still? And what would Vance do? What will progressives and leftists do? They'll say, here we go again. It's time to get angsty, get aggressive, because there's only so much people can take. And just because between progressivism and Trumpism, progressivism is the more, well-behaved, more decent political ideology, Doesn't mean that progressives will act well-behaved or decent. They might act aggressive, they might act violent, they do sometimes. And I'm very concerned about that. People who live in areas that just are prone to violence or that have a mix of people with different political views that are just clashing, what are the odds that we see violence in the streets? It's kind of an insane thing to think. We didn't think that this would be a thing even back during Trump's first term. It was just like, okay, people get upset about some issues. I know people go on Facebook and post some really aggressive, mean words against President Trump, criticizing his immigration policy, criticizing the latest stupid thing he said about whatever, climate change, COVID-19, taxes, healthcare. But we didn't think that there was going to be a civil war, even though people threw nasty words at each other all the time. But now that he's made such a mockery of our Constitution, he's posting pictures of himself as the Pope, suggesting he's going to be the new Pope. That is yet again another example of just the punitive nature of Donald Trump. Just like, hey, if a Democrat did this, they would be mocked. They would be just accused of the worst things possible. There would be death threats against them, if Obama did that. But Trump gets to do it, and so he's basically saying, hey, I get to do what I want, and you don't. I get to do what I want because I'm Donald freaking Trump, and I've got the media's blessing to do whatever I want. I say all sorts of other outrageous things that'll clog up the news cycle, and this one will be totally forgotten. I'm so special, look at me. If you did that, you would be in big trouble. Your whole base would be like, what? But my base eats it up. Catholics like Matt Walsh and others will not criticize Trump for that. They won't say it's insensitive. But he gets to go out there and he gets to meme it up, and they'll just say whatever insane things he says. Oh, they're just jokes, you don't understand jokes. You don't understand the meme. The left can't meme, they say. So again, the punitive nature, when he oversteps, they say, oh, it's just a meme, it's just a joke, It's the old Motte Bailey thing. So it's like, yeah, just, hey, shame on you, leftists. If you're mad about it, it's actually a good thing. Or if you're mad about it, it's just a joke. They always fall back on one of those two things. And how much more can progressives take? Progressives don't have a Democratic Trump. And I have a feeling that if they had a Democratic Trump, oh boy, the Republicans would be so mad. Someone who was just an expert at that whole game of, oh yeah, no, I'm joking, but hey, what if I were to be dictator, Or what if they slept with a book written by Adolf Hitler, a book written by Adolf Hitler next to them? What if they quoted Hitler and instead of saying immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country, said white straight men are poisoning the blood of our country, or Trump supporters are poisoning the blood of our country? Think about all that stuff that a Democrat just can't get away with saying, and that Trump can get away with saying the equal opposite version of that. Nobody bats an eye, and he's really rubbing it in their faces. How much can they take, though? That's the question. There's also the issue, I think, of climate change. And climate change is obviously a serious issue. It's one that Democrats even at times don't really take fully seriously enough. Sometimes they kind of just treat it like a sideshow. And in fact, President Biden on the campaign trail in 2020, he had a very poorly rated climate change plan back during the primary. It received an F- from the Sunrise Group. But then when he ran in the general, his climate plan, he took some from Bernie Sanders, and it was rated a lot more highly, and a lot of progressives were really pleased with it. But Trump, forget it. He would get an F- on his climate change plan, to the extent that he even has one. So what happens when people who are concerned about the planet think, okay, this administration might actually be make or break for our planet. We need to take action. I don't know if it is, but there are people who think it is. There are people who thought that, Biden's failures might cost us our planet back during 2021 to 2025, that he didn't take enough action, and so he was screwing us, or that Obama was screwing us, they didn't do enough, and they're partially to blame. So what happens when someone like Trump comes in there and is like putting his middle finger up to all the environmentalists? He appointed Lee Zeldin of New York, just some schlub from New York, who is like a total deregulator and a pro-business guy, to be head of the EPA. Totally unqualified. Just laughing in the face of environmentalists, people who are concerned about this issue. And if we don't have a planet, we don't have anything. That's the whole deal. We don't have anything. We don't worry about tax rates or tariffs if we don't have a planet, if we don't have a planet that's at least habitable. So what happens when environmentalist types see what Trump is doing and they say, you know what, I don't know how I can fix things. We got to stand up for our planet. They might be right, they might be wrong. I am not making any predictions as to what will happen with respect to climate change. Trump might not be the end all be all with respect to climate change. But some of these people are convinced that, yeah, we got to do something, and they'll see what Trump is doing and they'll be like, okay, we really need to do something about this guy. We need to do something. His supporters are insane. They're trashing our environment. They're trashing our earth. We only have one earth. We don't have a planet B, as they say. And so they might react violently. That is something to be concerned about as well. Now, I will say, I've raised all these fears, basically, fearmonger Morris out here. But yeah, at the end of the day, I do think that people have a certain level of kindness innate in them, a kindness toward people who disagree with them, a natural tendency to want to be friendly, even in the face of mild disagreement, that most people are not hyper partisans. They are not people who hear someone say, oh yeah, no, whatever, Trump is bad or Trump is good, and then have a hissy fit if they disagree with that. Or say, oh, the stock market tanking is a good thing, the stock market tanking is a bad thing, anything. People, I know plenty of progressive people who will hear you say some right-leaning thing and they won't lose their minds. They'll be calm about it, They won't treat it like, oh, that's it, this is the end of the world. And I know plenty of conservatives who are really gentlemanly, who are just decent, who really will treat people who disagree with them well. And I admire that so much about them. They will listen to who you voted for or listen to you talk about who you voted for and why you voted for them. And they'll say, yeah, no, look, I think that's wrong, but here are my reasons. And they give stuff that I would disagree with, but that's the way they do it. So I do think that a lot of people like to bluff. A lot of people are all bark and no bite, we shall say, and they wouldn't resort to violence. They wouldn't even resort to aggressive verbal tactics. A lot of the times, people are really good at being keyboard warriors. A keyboard warrior being someone who goes, on X or Facebook or something like that and types some spicy, aggressive, hateful comment about people who disagree with them, or even people who are different from them in some other aspect. They might be racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, whatever, but they wouldn't say something like that to people's face. They wouldn't be racist in person, sexist in person, homophobic in person, whatever. They wouldn't act that way. They just like to talk tough on the internet. Maybe they had a bad day at work, their boss was yelling at them, and they're like, freaking Trump supporters, freaking communists, freaking liberals, I can't stand these people, and they go on the internet and they type up some hateful message, just channeling all that anger from their day at work or whatever. That could be it too. That could be it. We have so many people who are just like that, who are like, yeah, no, once I get behind a keyboard, I'm a ferocious beast. But in person, I'm a sweet little puppy who's like, oh, you disagree with me? That's totally fine. That's cool. There is no red state or blue state. There's the United States, as Joe Biden frequently said in the 2020 campaign. So that's some of the white pilling that I've saved for the end here, that I do think that people have a fundamental decency in them, a desire to listen to other sides. It becomes very difficult to do so when there are people defending Trump, I will say that. It does. The Democratic Party has done stupid things that I think are very hard to defend, but not at the level, not with the same volume, with the same consistency that the Trump administration is doing it. I really do believe that, and I hope that you'll see why as some of these policy decisions come out, some of these decisions relating to immigration, decisions relating to arresting potentially governors, the deregulation, the destruction of the administrative state, which blatantly violates separation of powers, that this is not a normal bad administration. You could call Bush a normal bad administration. You could call pretty much anyone a normal bad administration. I don't think any president should be treated as like some amazing hero. There were even issues with Abraham Lincoln, for crying out loud, FDR, George Washington. George Washington owned slaves. Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. Look, there are so many problems with presidents, but we cannot excuse those problems. We cannot excuse Trump's problems by pointing to those problems. We just can't. This is a uniquely awful administration in the modern day. We haven't seen anything like it. It makes Richard Nixon's Watergate scandal look like child's play. It just does. And a lot of Republicans wanted to impeach Richard Nixon over that. There wasn't a civil war. But now, we've got some Republican politicians who are open to criticizing Trump, but not all that many. But we've got a galvanized 35% of the population that's just like, yeah, Trump, we're going to defend him no matter what. There are people who approve of him that might not necessarily be Trump supporters, and in that case, it's pretty cringe, even if at least the silver lining is they'd be open to defecting from Trump. But yeah, at the end of the day, we have to reason with people. We have to reason with them, not by using violence, not by using aggressive, hateful language, but just by educating them on U.S. history, on policy, on law, on the things that are important to informing our opinions. As I said in one of my videos before, use your intelligence for good. Use your intelligence for good. Don't use it to snicker at people, to smear them, to act snobbish towards them. Use it to educate them, to move this country in a better direction so that we don't have to deal with something like a second American Civil War. We don't want Texas to succeed. We don't want California to secede. No, we want everyone together. Everyone together. No secession. Keep the United States united these next 3 years. And yeah, how would a civil war even work too, with the fact that, you know, there are plenty of people of both parties in every single state, you know, like it's not geographical necessarily. There are purple states too. So it's so hard to imagine how that would work out. That's another white pilling thing against the idea of an American Civil War. And we just have too many distractions, you know, too many video games, you could say. The Nintendo Switch 2 is coming out. Make sure to play that. That will be a great distraction from the possible American Civil War 2.0 that arises. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Will there be a second American Civil War under President Trump? Like, comment, or subscribe to this channel. Thank you so much for watching. This has been The More the Merrier, and I look forward to speaking to you in my next video.